Hi, everyone, and welcome to this bridal shower class. I am so excited you're here. If you are new, welcome. If you are a returning student, welcome. I'm so happy you're all here. Whether you are advanced beginner, intermediate, whatever level, you are all welcome, and I'm so excited. So, as always, I like to start my classes with a little bit of breathing because, well, why not? Help center us a little bit. So 3 breaths together, in and out. Let's go. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. One more. Breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. Okay, that always helps me center just a little bit before we start class. I hope you are here to have some fun, to learn a thing or two. Take the stress off. This is pre-recorded. You can pause this whenever you want. You can rewind. You can fast forward, whatever floats your boat. I will be starting by talking a little bit just about the prep, the set, the designs, the ethos, that kind of stuff. So if you want to skip away, no offense taken. I'll start by doing a little bit of talking, then we'll go to the practice sheet where we will go over also how to hold piping bags, cut them, all that stuff. And then we'll actually get to decorate. So let's talk a little bit about this class here. This is my first ever bridal themed class, and I wanted to do a bridal shower and find something that is as universal as possible. So I went with florals, clearly. Now, I very specifically decided to do florals this way. So most of the time, florals are done with a piping tip. That requires a medium peak piping consistency, sometimes a stiff peak. You have to buy the piping tips. Not a huge investment, but it's something else to buy. And it also is very hard on the hand when you have to pipe that much stiff consistency. So I wanted to do something that didn't use a piping tip and didn't use a stiff consistency. So we are doing this outline and flood flower. I learned this from Sweet Sugar Belle personally many moons ago. The only downside to this, I think, is that you have to outline and flood everything, but I don't know. I like the look. It's different. So hopefully you like the look too. We are doing a medium peak though, obviously with the green here for the leaves. In terms of the color, I tried to pick a pretty universal, well, maybe not universal, common color palette. Obviously for whichever bride you're doing this for, you're going to want to customize the color palette there. We are doing a little bit of gold accents today, so we will be going over that. What else can I talk about? In terms of the icing itself, right? We've got all of our icing prepped and ready to go. We are working with a 2 consistency outline and flood. So we're outlining with a soft peak. We are flooding with what I'm calling a thick flood. In terms of your prep, and I wrote this in the workbook as well. If you're nervous about whether you have a true thick flood or not, I do recommend erring on the thinner side. If your icing is too thick, it's just not going to be fun. I just wanted you to push you to do something a little bit thicker than like a really thin flood, because that's going to help with, flooding these smaller areas. But if it's too thin, doing something like the size of the heart or the dress is not going to be fun. If you start decorating and you're like, I don't know if I have the right consistency, 9 times out of 10, I just roll with it. I make it work. And I make a mental note. It was too thick, too thin, whatever. It's a lot of work to have to unbag it and fix it. That said, if you're flooding away and it is just not settling, and it dries before you can even finish flooding, like, you might need to rebag your flood consistency. So just keep that in mind, but that's the beauty here. If you start going and you're like, I really have to fix my icing, you can pause the video. Yay. Okay. The order of this class is very carefully executed. I am using a dehydrator to dry my cookies. That is largely because since I'm only doing one cookie at a time, I have to be able to speed up the process to keep the class moving. So I am using a dehydrator. I will do my best to make notes about, to put the cookie in, take the cookie out, because sometimes we will be taking cookies out before we start working on them. Generally with a dehydrator, I recommend, first of all, obviously the temperature should be as low as possible. Mine goes to 95, so that's where I have it set. Don't put it in for more than 10 to 15 minutes at a time. And in total, I try not for more than like an hour. So just keep that in mind with however you're actually executing things behind the scenes. If you don't have a dehydrator, no problem. A table fan is great. Just something airflow directed at the cookie. If you don't have anything, that is okay too. These are just tools to kind of help speed up the process. In terms of the order, so I will say that if you are decorating a large order, and when I say a large order, I'd say anything more than like 3 batches of cookies, 3 batches of my dough. So whatever that amounts to. I don't know what that, like maybe 6 dozen or something. I don't know, something. Anyway, but I would say maybe more than like maybe more than 5 to 10 of each design, something in that region. Anyway, for that, I recommend doing one design at a time. And I would recommend starting with the darkest color, which in this case is anything with the fuchsia, because the darker the color, the faster it's going to separate. So I personally always like to start with the darkest ones. For today's class, assuming that you are working with like 1, maybe 2 batches of dough, we are going to break it up a bit. So we're going to start with, what are we starting with? We're starting with the dress, the heart, and the bouquet. We will do all of those and we will have those finished before we move on to the next one, which we are going to isolate just the love on its own. This one I will talk about a bit more, requires some special timing to get it right. And then we will finish off with the 2 banners and the cake. Let me just check that. Yes. Okay. I don't recommend trying to tackle all of the designs at once, because then you're going to have a whole bunch of cookies sitting out in various stages of drying. And you want to get them like finished as soon as possible, which is why we'll do 3, then 1, then another 3. Anything else I can say? I have my schedule to the side, which is why I keep looking to the side. Anything else I want to mention? I think that's it. So, let's talk about all the stuff we have with us. We have our icing, obviously. We've got our naked cookies. We have our practice sheets. We need the intermediate one, the one with numbers and bride, and the love one, which apparently I have 2 of, which is fine. We need paper towels. And then for the tools, we've got 3, hopefully 3 scribes. You don't have to have 3 scribes, but since we're taking it up a notch here, I recommend that you work with what I work with, which is I always have a thingamajiggy. I have the PME scribe, which, by the way, this is my second one and it's a lot thicker than the original one. So I don't know what that's about. Whichever one you have is fine. And then I have like a thicker, more standard metal scribe here. You also need something to scrape the icing with. So if you have a thingamajiggy, fine. If you have just like a kitchen knife, that works too. We also need scissors. I like these small ones. Optional is an edible marker. I'll show you when you can use it. I'm not sure if I will use it at all. There's one instance probably with this guy that I might end up using it. You do need some sort of a crackle tool. Since we have paintbrushes, we need a detail paintbrush and we need a paintbrush that's like flatter and a bit wider, something to this effect. Mine are dirty because I haven't cleaned them since the last time I used the gold, which is fine. Something with a rounded end for the crackle. I actually like the size of this small one for the crackle that we're doing today, but whatever you have is fine. For the gold stuff itself, obviously we need our wedding gold, some sort of vessel or something, even just like a paint palette, something to mix it in. I like to use this because I can reuse it. Not necessary, but I love this little scoop so I don't get gold dust everywhere. And then I'm using the color solution today, but you can also use Everclear or any sort of clear alcohol that has a high alcohol content. I know that like vodka, I believe, has different alcohol contents, and I've heard some people not have success with the ones that have less alcohol content. The alcohol is what evaporates and allows the dust to dry, essentially. I believe that is it for everything we have. So we're going to get started with our practice sheet. I'm just going to put these cutie patooties to the side. Get my space ready to rock and roll. Okay. We need this is the practice sheet we're starting with. If you want to skip ahead to the decorating, go ahead. We're going to do the practice sheet. I'm going to show you how to cut the bags, hold the bags. For this, I recommend starting with the peach flood and piping consistency, because in the directions I did instruct you to do like a little bit extra, knowing that we would want to use this for the practice sheet. But if you made extra of any other color, totally fine to use that. So we've got our flood, we've got our piping, we have a paper towel, and we have our scissors. So first things first, I like to just go over how to hold the bag before we cut the bag, just because, you know, the icing is going to like come out of it. So with every tipless bag, there is the fold and there's the seam directly across from it. I like to take the seam, match the seam up with your knuckles and the top of the bag up with the top of your hand, like so. Then wrap your pointer and your thumb around the top. You should be able to hold the bag just with your pointer and your thumb. And then wrap the rest of your fingers around the bag, or with a bag this size, I usually take my ring and my pinky and bring it below. So I'm applying pressure from the top down with my thumb predominantly. If you are even here, let's see. So if you hold the bag in the middle, obviously you're going to send pressure in both directions. Not good. Even if you're just barely below the top of the bag, you're still sending pressure in two different directions, which is not good. So make sure you're really holding the bag at the top of the bag. When we are piping details, we're typically at a 45-degree angle. When we are flooding, it's more like a 90-degree angle. If you're right-handed, you will pipe from left to right. If you are left-handed, you will pipe from right to left, which I know is different than how we deal with writing. I'm personally right-handed, but I know with writing, anyway. So if you're left-handed, just keep in mind, the workbook talks a little bit about the changes you want to make, but generally from right to left. So first things first, before we cut the bags, make sure you don't have any air bubbles. I've got a couple right here. If your icing has started to separate, that will look like kind of darker striations in your bag. You can kind of massage any separation out. You can massage air bubbles. You can also hold the bag tightly and swing it around like a helicopter. This is obviously only to do this before you cut the bag, right? So get your bag nice and tight. Now, cutting the bag. So brace your arms on the edge of the table, all right? Take your bag, find that seam again, turn it over and find the fold. So the fold is on top. I prefer to cut with the fold on top. Some people swear by cutting with the seam on top. I personally think, you know, depending on the bags you're using, sometimes the seam has extra plastic and it's just kind of hard to see what you're working with. So I like to hold the bag from the top and just kind of squeeze it to give some pressure and kind of fluff out the end so it's nice and straight and full. Don't squeeze it because you're going to add more folds to your bag. Just give it a nice fluff. Take your scissors, bracing your arm against the table as best as possible, cut straight across, okay? I like to brace my scissors on my pointer finger. For piping details, I generally say around like 4 to 5 millimeters. Flood is around like 6 to 7. So let me cut my tip, show you how much I cut, okay? So not a lot. I'm gonna test it out and see if I like how much I've cut. That looks great to me. So obviously I'm not with you. So if your line is not as big as the line in the practice sheet, it's either because you're not applying enough pressure or the tip of your bag is not big enough. More often than not, it's not enough pressure. Okay. So just keep that in mind. The amount of pressure you need to pipe soft peak piping consistency at this size is like, what is it? It's kind of like picking up a glass. Like you need to give enough pressure to hold it, but you're not like squeezing it. Okay, so my line broke right there. Lines break either because there's an air bubble in the bag or you're applying inconsistent pressure. In that case, it was inconsistent pressure. I was not paying attention. You want to start your line, clean off your bag first, very gently sandwich it in between your paper towel. Apply a tiny bit of pressure so you have like a millimeter of icing sticking out of your bag. Make contact with the paper, lift, and apply more pressure. Come down and make contact. So contact, lift, contact. I actually think my tip is just like a hair too small. So I want to show you what it looks like to actually cut hair. So you see how much I cut? That's not even a millimeter, but that will make a difference. So if you're getting beads at the beginning of your lines, like circles, if you're more advanced, you can focus on that. If you're less advanced, don't worry about it. It comes from having too much icing at the end of your bag. So you want to focus on having just barely enough icing to make contact. Lift your bag, okay, anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to an inch off the surface of the table or the cookie or whatever, and guide your icing, all right? If you need more help bracing your hand, you can take your pointer and middle finger of your other decorating hand and brace usually the palm of your decorating hand. Sometimes the bag, if the bag is really big, but in this case, probably just the palm. And that gives you a little more stability. This is not indicative of your skill level. I know I can think of 2 expert cookiers off the top of my head who brace their decorating hand. I just didn't learn that way, and so that's not how I do it. Let's do these more difficult lines at the bottom. So you're going to make contact, you're going to lift, and you are going to guide your icing. This is actually quite challenging, but you see how much I'm lifting my bag off the table? And make landing. So it's kind of like reading music. You want to lay your icing down and always have your eyes ahead of the icing. How much pressure you apply is based on the thickness of your icing and the size of the tip of your bag. You should be able to pipe an entire line without having to move your arm off the table. You should have like close to 180-degree radius. Maybe it's like 160 or something. You should be able to move your wrist fully. Okay. So like this one is just, or it's mostly wrist action. Tiny, tiny wrist action. And you see how high, see if I try to do it down here, like it's just not as good. And obviously if I try to like pipe with my bag attached to the paper, not so good. So we're going to practice flooding. First thing is I want to actually outline the shapes first. So with anything with a sharp corner, contact, lift, contact, lift, contact. You might want to switch it up. So you're always going from left to right or right to left if you are left-handed. Circle, you can do clockwise or counterclockwise, whatever feels more comfortable. Generally, people hate circles. They're not fun. But you lift the bag off the table, okay? So we're gonna let that dry for a minute. I always just rest my bag on a paper towel. I'm gonna put these over here. So let's grab our flood. Flood is going to separate faster because it's thinner. So especially make sure, you know, you've gotten any air bubbles out, any separation, all that good stuff. You can also tap your bag like that. I think that works better when the bag is bigger. So let's cut our flood bag. So this is going to be more like 6 to 7 millimeters. So bracing our arms on the edge of the table, give it some pressure, fluff it out, cut straight across. That's approximately what we're working with. Obviously, if your icing is thinner, a smaller tip will have more of an impact, or a bigger tip will have even more of an impact. Let's get to flooding. I actually think maybe the tip of my bag is a little too small. So this is where, you know, it's good to keep in mind that you can always make a tip bigger, but it's a lot harder to make it smaller, right? So when you're working with sharp corners too, bring your icing into the corner to kind of lay it on top of the icing. That's how you'll get the most seamless look. So I'm going to cut a little bit more on this bag. That might have been like a solid millimeter, I'd say. So let me just demonstrate, you know, if you're not as precise with your flooding, that's okay. You've got your scribe. Obviously, though, you've got one shot with that outline. One shot. Et voila. So you can keep practicing if you want. I would recommend using probably a different color though, so you don't use too much of your peach. And I am going to fold up this practice sheet, and we are going to move on to decorating. How very, very exciting. All right, as promised, we are going to start with the heart and the dress. So let's grab these. We'll start with the heart. We're just going to outline first. So a lot of people ask, you know, do you let your outline dry or not? I do both, but I would say generally like the strongest way or most effective, I don't know, what am I trying to say? If you let it dry, it's like a fence, right? And the fence becomes sturdier if it's dried. If it's not dry, it's going to be more malleable and be able to move around. So if I'm flooding a large surface, like an entire cookie, I generally make sure I let the outline dry because that will be able to hold the icing in better. For smaller things, maybe like these flowers and whatnot, if you don't let the outline dry, then if you flood right away, it kind of more seamlessly sinks into the outline. So just keep that in mind. We have not, we're using pink, not white. We will use our white, but for now, we need to grab our pink. And I'm just going to get my icing, kind of give it a home over here. Yes, your icing is just going to come out of the flood bags. It's just what happens. So let's cut our bags. We're going to start with our piping consistency. We haven't used this yet, so get any air bubbles out. Cut that bag. Don't do it over your cookie like I just did, because you might get plastic on your cookie and lose it. I'm doing more like 5 millimeters today, I think, because I want like slightly bigger tip. Okay, I like that. So with a heart, you can either go left, you can go one side, other side, or you can go all the way around. Going all the way around in one go is definitely harder. So I'd probably recommend one side then the other side. So you make contact, you lift, and you really make sure to lay the icing on the edge of the cookie. If you mess up terribly, you can always scrape it off with your knife or thingamajiggy. That didn't quite lay down, so I'm just gonna help that. Okay, so we're gonna move that to the side just while we grab, you know what? I wonder if that was in focus. If it was not, I apologize. I have to remember to manually focus this. Okay, so let's grab our white piping consistency. Same deal. Cut that in a piping tip or like detail piping. That's good. Okay. So there are little like indents here kind of to symbol the sash, but I just ignore those. I like to start here, making contact, lifting your bag off the surface. So kind of doing whatever I can to still maintain like left to right. And now here, you could go all the way around, but kind of what's easier is probably to do it. Again, this brings you from like the left to right. And I just want to say on outlining, there's a difference between like laying the outline on the edge of the cookie, on the top edge of the cookie versus like hugging the side. You want to make sure that you are putting it on the very edge of the cookie. If you're not sure, leave like a tiny bit of the cookie showing to make sure you are. If you kind of hug the outside of it, what that's going to do is that when you add the flood to it, instead of the fence being right, like directly upright, it's going to be kind of caved or like curved out. So the icing is going to be more likely to over flood, which is no bueno. So let's grab our heart again. And we need our pink flood this time. Mine has a ton of air bubbles in it. So make sure I give it a good spin before I cut it. And let's get to flooding. So when I flood, it's almost a 90-degree angle. And the amount of pressure is like opening a tough pickle jar. Obviously, if your icing is really thin, you don't need as much pressure. I usually do the first round of flood, maybe not as much pressure. And then I really have at it after the first one. I find that tends to help me not overflood. Other things you can do to like help with not overflooding is you can actively not like fill in all the holes as you're flooding. You can also flood from the outside in, meaning like flooding, and then like not flooding all the way to the edge and using your scribe to bring it to the edge. I personally don't do that, but I know a lot of people who do. So we're going to pop the heart in the dehydrator at this point. When you pick up your cookie, pick it up like this and not with one hand. Pick it up with two hands, transfer it to level. If you ever get cracks on the surface of your icing, it's probably because you were moving it like this too much, while the top surface just barely had crusted, but the icing underneath was still very wet. So the icing like moves as you're moving the cookie and cracks the surface of the icing. Let's get our white out. All of my icing has a lot of air bubbles in it today. Whoops. Ooh, I'm really moving that camera. Okay. Whoops, whoops, whoops. Okay, if you're like me and you did a really sloppy job filling your bag, sometimes it's worth refilling it because then you get all this like crusty dried icing that flakes off. And I've had it flake into my cookies before and it's very annoying. So let's flood. It takes a lot of practice to get used to like how much icing is enough icing without it over flooding. But again, I like to do like less pressure for the first row. You see what I'm doing here? I'm bringing up the icing. It's really easy to overflood those corners. And you'll see it very quickly. So I'm pretty careful with the first row, and then I just kind of like work as quickly as I can to finish the rest of it. I'm actually going to switch out to my smaller scribe. So any corners, again, always use your scribe to kind of pull over the edge of the corner. And that's what's going to get you the most seamless look. If you have any little pokies, you just kind of want to jiggle the surface of the icing with your scribe. You're not puncturing the icing, you're just jiggling it. Okay, I didn't quite get my icing into the corner there. All right, if you start to move your scribe around your icing and it is wrinkling, that's because the icing has started to crust and you can no longer manipulate it, okay? Ship has sailed. Now let's move our dress into the dehydrator. You know what? I want to show you something actually. So if you have any air bubbles, like I have an air bubble right there. This might be too late, but poke it. That's how you get the air bubble out, and then kind of jiggle the surface just to make it flat again. Okay, so the heart and the dress are just chilling, drying right now. Next, we're going to tackle the bouquet. So this is a fun one. This is where you could use an edible marker if you want to mark out the flowers. I personally feel like it cramps my creativity to actually draw out the flowers in this case. I think I did it the first bouquet I did just to like get a sense of placement. But then after that, I just kind of went for it. And yes, all of my bouquets look different, but I think it looks cool. We need our green. Okay, we're going to start with the green. Mine has a bunch of air bubbles, but since this is really thick icing, usually like the best way is to just kind of like massage them out. Okay, we are going to be using this bag of green in two different ways. First, we're going to do the stem area with just a normal opening on our tip. And then when we're done with all of our stem areas, well, all of our bouquets, then we'll cut the bag to a leaf tip. So that's a little trick. We're doing two different tips on the same bag, but if you're going to do that, you have to make sure that you do the round tip first, and that the round tip does not need to be bigger than the leaf tip. In this case, we're doing bigger than normal. I'd say this is like 5 to 6 millimeters because this is a really thick icing, and if you don't cut it big enough, it's going to be a royal pain in the bumpkins to do those stems. This is like not quite thick enough. I want to do a little bit more. So let me just show you like how much we're working with here. So that in comparison to the other piping consistencies, it's obviously like a hair bigger. So first thing we're going to do is the bottom of the stem. So I chose in this design not to fill this with a million stems for two reasons. One, from a practical standpoint, it's really hard on the hand to be piping all of those lines, and it just takes time, and who wants to do that? But also from like an aesthetics perspective, my style and this set is a little simpler and like bigger shapes. Like, look at this bouquet, like these are pretty big flowers. So visually, I think it looks better to have it a little more sparse, but I didn't want to just do the lines. So it's a little trick to first start by kind of spreading icing on the base. So you're going to need your thingamajiggy or your knife, whatever. And all we need to do is cover this bottom portion. Even if you have the right size tip on this bag, it is probably going to be pretty challenging to pipe the icing. I like to pick this up at this point just because I think it's the easiest way to like get the icing all the way to the edge, like so. Just covering this bottom portion. And then I just kind of take the tool and kind of bring it all down and flatten it out. It does not need to be perfect. I think it actually looks cool with like some slightly uneven icing, my personal opinion. And then in terms of piping the lines, I like to go, so obviously I'm turning my cookie to make it easier to pipe. If you're left-handed, you're going to want to turn it the other direction. I like to start at the bottom. If you struggle with like beads at the end of your line, you might want to go the opposite direction and then kind of take your scribe and just like chop off any excess. You can also see that I did not start all the way at the edge. I think visually it looks nice to have a little bit of the flat green poking out. Let me show you what it looks like to do it the opposite direction. You can see I'm struggling. So I did cut that off myself with the tip of my bag, but let me show you what it looks like to not. Oh no. Okay, my visual spacing got off for sure. I don't think I would have added that many, but I needed one more to make it look good. Okay, so take your scribe and kind of lop off the end, and that gives it a nice kind of waterfall effect off the edge. Okay, so we're going to put that green away for now. I mean, obviously do all of your stems. Next up, we need our piping consistency of our fuchsia, pink, and peach. So we've got our pink and our peach already, but let's get our fuchsia rocking and rolling. Okay, so plan of attack. We're going to start with the fuchsia. The fuchsia is the flower that's here. It's the one up here, and that's the one to the side. Those are the anchor flowers. We'll start there. And then we're going to do the peach, and then we'll do the pink. Right now, all we're doing is outlining, okay? And in this case, I am lifting the bag a bit, but then as I'm shaping the rest of the flower, I am actually kind of doing exactly what I tell you not to do, which is basically hovering over the cookie with the icing. You could make these more uniform. I like them kind of wonky, personal preference. Most important thing is just make sure that there is space in between all of them, but especially the one over here, because you are going to put a flower in between there. The goal here is to not have any of the colors touching. Then with the peach, we start over here with the outline edge, and you want to see, so the leaves are going to go here, 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 and here. Okay. So we've got that edge, and we want to finish out the peach here. Then down here, we want to connect the two fuchsias and make sure you're covering the top edge of the stems. That's going to give it the most seamless look. And then we're going to kind of close out the peach there. And then we're going to use our pink to finish off the rest of it. So the corner down here gets a little peach one or pink one. The corner here gets a pink one. So we're just finishing off the edges here, leaving space for our little leaves. And then this is kind of the weirdest spot. Because we want to have pink, this is pink, this is pink, and that's going to be peach. This weird little flower in here is to make sure that none of these colors are touching. That shouldn't be. So we've now outlined all of our flowers, and we're going to start with our fuchsia flower. So keep in mind again that like fuchsia is the darkest color here, has the most food coloring, so it's going to separate faster. Let's cut our bag. And we're going to go ahead and flood our fuchsia flowers. So generally one at a time is good. You don't have to be super like precise about this. Use enough icing to kind of give it a fluffy look, puffy look, but obviously not too much. This is where having a slightly thicker flood is going to help. You might be wondering, Grace, should I be doing the squiggle technique on here to help prevent craters? Obviously, I am not. And I chose not to because who's got time for that? But also, we're going to be covering the top of these flowers with this detail piping. So if there is slight cratering, it's going to get covered. And these kinds of designs always make me so happy when there's going to be some sort of technique that will cover up a mistake. Well, not a mistake, but like cratering happens. Even to me, as an expert cookier, cratering still happens to me. I have not figured out the magic touch. So we're going to put the bouquet in the dehydrator. It's really important to make sure we're not leaving this in the dehydrator for too long because it's going to be exposed cookie for a while. But putting that in there will help speed up drying. Brain fart. It'll speed up crusting the flowers so we can be adding flowers next to it. Okay. So we're going to put our dress to the side. And then we're going to grab our flower. I mean, this is called a heart. Thank you. Okay. So first we want to make sure this is dry enough. All we're going to be doing is adding the detail lines. So kind of run your finger across your heart. Is it smooth but tacky? It kind of goes through phases. It's just straight up wet. It is tacky. Smooth but tacky, and then smooth. If you can kind of run your finger across, but there's some resistance, that's the right stage of dryness, which can take anywhere from like 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how you're drying your cookie, your environment, etc. If you're a little nervous about sticking your finger on this, you can always do it in a place that's going to get covered, like the center, in case you crack it. I have unintentionally cracked many a surface of my icing That's just what happens as you're learning to work with it. Okay. So we're going to grab our pink piping consistency and we're going to pipe these lines. These lines are ultimately going to get painted. There are a couple schools of thought of what color you should do these lines. One school of thought, especially when using edible luster dust like we are today, which doesn't have quite the immaculate coverage as not edible luster dust, is to pipe in a similar color to the actual luster dust. So in this case, it would be like a golden yellow because that will have the best marriage with the coverage. Another school of thought is to just use like white, which we don't need to today because we're going to do my personal favorite, which is when you're going to pipe small detail stuff, lettering, whatever, on top of a flood that you're ultimately going to paint. I always like to do the detail piping in the same color as the flood, because then if you're not perfectly painting your lines, it's less noticeable because it just melts in with the color of the flood. Okay. So we're just going to do 3 lines here. So you're piping the first line, basically cutting the heart in half. Okay. Second line about like a centimeter up, and you're trying to divide or have it crisscross right in the center of the heart as best as you can. If your crisscross is a little messy, whatever, it's fine because it's going to get covered with the flower anyway. Take your scribe if you want and kind of lop off any excess. This is like next level perfectionism. If you don't do this, that's okay. We're going to actually leave this just to the side. I don't want this to spend too much time in the dehydrator. So put this in a safe place to the side. Then we're going to grab our bouquet from the dehydrator very carefully. All right. All right, so next up, we're going to do our peach flood. Okie dokie. So let's grab our flood, clean off the tip of our bag. What you're looking for here is that, you know, your icing, whoopsies, is just barely dry enough. I just kind of stuck my finger in there too much and took off some of the icing. Oopsies, that's fine. All you need is that it's just not wet. So that when we flood up next to it, the peach is not going to melt into the pink. And in this case, I would probably, you know, as best you can, especially when you do this working on your own, I would flood these flowers as soon as you can. Don't wait. Because, you know, the longer you have this naked cookie exposed to the air, the more time it has to dry out. So I'm just using my scribe to kind of like encourage the icing to the edge to kind of cover up whatever outline I can. But, you know, if there is outline, it's fine. This is where it's important that that these 2 peach sections don't touch. If they do touch accidentally, you can always, when we go back and do the pink, you can kind of cover up the part that touches if you want to make sure that your color isn't touching. How many more times can I say touch? Okay, the bouquet goes back in the dehydrator. And then we move on to the dress. Okay. I do want to say that if you feel like your heart is still like pretty, what's the word? Like not wet, but like not dry enough at this point, this is a good time, I think, to put it back in the dehydrator for a little bit. I think I'm going to do that because I want to make sure that it is plenty dry for what's coming next, which is we're painting. And we want to make sure that that flood is like dry enough to hold up whatever we're putting on top of it, which is going to be a flower and pipe painting and all that good stuff. All right, we are doing the detail piping now. Well, we're doing the orange line and the white lines. We're not going to do the flower yet. So let's grab our orange piping consistency and our white. I'm going to start with the orange. And all this is, again, make sure that your icing is like smooth but tacky. If it's not that dry yet, maybe pause this video, put it in the dehydrator, whatever you can to like give it a little more time to dry. The name of the game here is to just have it dry enough, just enough. If you're really more like a beginner, you may want to give it more time to dry. When it's in the stages of drying, if it's not quite dry enough, you can easily like puncture it with your tool, with your icing, whatever. So, but these kinds of things like you learn with experience and by doing and going, oh, that's definitely not dry enough. Like I can't tell you how many times I've done bear technique on icing that's not dry enough. And you just have to learn by doing. Okay, we did our orange across the top. Learn by doing, and I mean like, you know, when I'm teaching in-person classes, I can see how dry your icing is. Obviously, I can't see how dry your icing is, so I can't really help you. I'm sorry. For this detail piping at the bottom, we're not going to bring the lines all the way to the end, okay? I like to start at the bottom. This one is a nice curve. So this is where you're really guiding your icing into the corner, okay? Contact, lift. That's a less of a curve. And this one's basically a straight line. So you don't have to worry too much about this corner here because it's going to get covered by a flower. So don't worry about that. Okay. I'm just checking to see. I think I am going to put the dress in the dehydrator for a little bit at this point, just so it's a little more stable for the flower. Again, this is where you like just need to kind of keep an eye out. I'm only doing one cookie at a time, so my timing is a little different. But while we put the dress in, we're going to take the, oops, as I'm saying things and doing something differently. Okay. Leave the heart in there. Grab your bouquet. So the heart and the dress are in the dehydrator at this point. And we are going to do the last flower flood, which is the pink. And this is just about filling in all the last spots. You know, I'm using the scribe to kind of settle all these flowers, but if your icing is thin enough, you really don't need to. It'll settle on its own. And, you know, time is money, y'all. And if you have to set your icing down and use your scribe every time, that just takes more time. So here I have like almost contact with my peaches. So I'm going to use my pink and kind of flood over a little bit in that corner just to kind of fake it till I make it. Oh my God, I love this so much. Oh, it looks so pretty. I'm in love. I'm in love. Okay. So we're going to put the bouquet in the dehydrator. We need some good time to dry those floods. And then we're going to take our heart out. Whenever you take a cookie out of the dehydrator, give it a few minutes to just kind of cool down before you decorate on it. I say that, but how often do I actually do that? You'll never know. No. Okay. So this is good because we're going to give it a little bit of time to cool down while we get out all of our gold fun. Use me. Okay. So we've got our gold. We have our little container, color solution, and my scoop. So for this one, we need our small detail brush. You don't want the brush to be like too big, too long, too wide, because it'll hold too much liquid. And you'll see, actually, I'll demonstrate this, what happens when you have too much liquid on the end of your brush. I am going to disappoint you, I think, by saying that I don't know exactly how much liquid to powder you need. We're going to be using a lot of gold today. This is the benefit of having a reusable container because you never waste it. You don't have to like throw out what you didn't use. It just gets like reconstituted every time. So I don't know. I'm doing like 3 little scoopy scoops. Okay. Okay, so we've got our scoops. Then if you don't have a scoop, you can always like tap it like this, which I'm pretty good at, but I've had a couple of mishaps and you don't need to waste stuff. So the color solution, start with a few drops. I don't know, that was like 4. Always close your gold. Can't tell you how many times I have spilled that, which is just dumb. Give it a good mix. And what you're going for is enough coverage or like enough powder to liquid that you can have good coverage in one go. That's perfect. Like you can see that it's covered. Whoops, I didn't need to do that second one. It's covered in one go. If you paint and it's a little thin, actually, you know what? I'm going to show you what it looks like. Oh, this kills my soul a little, but I'll just add more powder and I know we're going to end up using it. So it's okay. All right. Can you see the difference in coverage? You can see the green coming through this one. Like there's definitely gold on it, but you can see the green. So there's not enough powder. I'm going to take my powder. I have to add a lot because I know I added a lot of liquid. Oh, stuff is expensive. Okay. So give it a good mixeroo. I hope this is good enough now. I might cry if it's not. Not quite. I can still kind of see that. This is where this little scoop comes in great handy because you can be a little more precise. Okay, that looks, I can even tell by how that looks. So always kind of like, ooh, did I add too much? You know that you don't have enough liquid if it kind of paints on like, oh my God, now I have too much liquid. I mean, too much. No, I'm good. If it's kind of like textury, as you're painting, if that makes sense, like it's not smooth, that means it's too dry, there's not enough liquid. As you're painting, the liquid will evaporate. I know it's annoying. So like you're gonna have to keep adding more liquid as we go, even to have the same amount of saturation. So let me show you what it looks like if you have way too much at the end of your tip and then you go to paint. I'm trying to emulate making a mistake and this is not going. Let's see. Kind of worked. Okay, you'll get bleed over. You can kind of see that. Whoops, I'm now painting my bottle. So this is really hard to fix if you get any bleed over off the edge of what you're painting. The best way to combat that, if you get any bleed over, you need a clean paintbrush. I would recommend something either with like an angled tip like this that's pretty small, or maybe something like this. It has to be clean. You can take water or clear alcohol, whatever you're using. Let the gold paint dry a little bit. See if I can show you what I mean here. Take the clean brush that is wet with probably alcohol is the best thing to do, but I often just use water. And you want to kind of like, as best you can, scrape off what you can, but you're going to notice there's not a lot you can do. I usually do it when the gold is still wet because I'm impatient. Some people wait until it dries. I would go with whatever floats your boat. Do I recommend waiting till it dries or not? I might recommend waiting until it dries, especially if there's like a lot glopping off. Yeah, because then there'll be less liquid that you're working with. So maybe wait till it dries. But so you take it off with your clean but wet brush. You scrape off what you can. And then you need another, that brush, if you can dry it really well, like dry, and then wipe it again. That said, cleaning a mistake with gold is very hard to do. And often it leaves it messier than when you started. So sometimes and often it's better to just leave it. I'm going to see if I had a mistake on this one. No. Often it's just better to leave it, to be totally honest, and and it's just, shit happens, stuff happens, sorry. Okay, so let's get to actually painting. Now, there's an art to how much you want on the end of your brush, and there's an art to the angle of it. So I always like to be like perpendicular to what I'm painting. I got like a tiny bit of bleed there, you can see, but it's definitely not enough to do anything about. And I just very lightly paint the top of the line. So always turn your cookie. If you have enough, like on just the right amount, you could probably paint as much as I just did. If you have a lot on there, you might want to like get some of it off. That was not quite enough. Obviously, we're going to be covering the center here. So you want to do your best to get as good coverage as you can, but not at the expense of bleeding over the edge. So if that means that you're only painting the very, very top of the line and you just can't get around the sides of it very well, whatever, let the ship sail. It's good enough. I caution you here because I can't tell you like how many gold details I've ruined because I've tried to be too meticulous and too perfectionist about it. The other question I get is like, should you do a second layer? I would say as best as you can, only do one layer. I know that the coverage on this edible gold is not quite as good if you're used to using other gold, but a second layer is going to do two things if you don't do it well. One, it gets like too much product glopped on the thing, which can either visually not look good because you're going to have like extra dry gloppiness, or when it dries, it's not going to quite dry enough, and it will come off like on your hands and on your bags. I was just doing this. So this is just the right amount of gold. Look, it's not coming off on my finger. If you use too much though, it will come off on your finger. So hopefully that wasn't too painful. That is the simpler of the small detail that we'll be doing today. When you're done, try to just get the gold off onto the container if you can. If you do need to like clean it off, obviously you're just like cleaning off whatever you were using. And for the love of all things holy, if you can close whatever you're using, close it. I've been like, oh, it's fine. I'm not going to tip that over. And then do I tip it over? Of course I tip it over. So just learn from my mistakes. Okay. We are going to next, you can set this aside to like actually let it dry. Like if you used way too much, you might want to set it aside and let it dry. I'm going to have us set this aside and let the gold dry a little bit. And we're going to take our dress out of the dehydrator along with the bouquet. So I want to give the bouquet just enough time, but not too much time. So to me, this looks pretty good. You're really going to be basing it off of the light pink, right? Because everything else has been in there longer. Like the fuchsia is almost smooth. The peach is still pretty tacky. And so is the pink for me, but I don't want to leave it in there too long. So I'm going to take it out at this point. If you need to leave it in longer, you can. We're going to be doing the flowers next on the dress and the dress and find my words. The heart. Oh my God. Okay. Both of these are the fuchsia flower. If you want to change the color up, totally fine. I was just like rolling with fuchsia being the main color. So for this one, we've got our fuchsia outline and flood ready to go. Again, you could do this more precise, or you can do your flower kind of wonky, whatever makes you happy. That was a really wonky flower. You want to kind of lay the outline on top of the orange and the white. And then we're going to go in and flood this immediately. Since the outline is nice and wet, you can kind of jiggle the flood to settle with the outline. If it looks a little blobby, that's okay, because you're going to go in with the detail piping and you can give it its shape then. So this is going to go back in the dehydrator. One thing, if you're using a dehydrator and you don't trust yourself, you can always set a timer for 10 minutes every time you put a cookie in there, something like that. I usually fly by the seat of my pants. Sometimes I regret that. Sometimes it's fine. So same deal, fuchsia. You could also do like kind of scalloped edges like this instead of the like wonky nonsense I've been doing. And then we're going to flood this. So I want to point out here that I very intentionally had us paint the gold lines before we did the flower, and I want to talk about why. I'm going to put this in the dehydrator first, though. So when painting gold detail, I always recommend as much as possible to be able to paint the gold before you put anything next to it. It is just so much less stressful if you can paint the gold before you put something next to it. Because look, if you're trying to paint up against the flower, obviously you wouldn't, at least I don't think. Well, I guess you could do the leaves, but painting up against the flower or the leaves, whatever, it's just one more thing to like accidentally knock your paintbrush against. And I've like, this would more often than not have a little pool of gold next to the flower, because it's hard to do. Okay. So it's just so much less stressful to do the gold first. Okay. If you forgot and you did the flower, like ship has sailed, just do the gold second. But if you can do the gold first, it's better for all things involved. That's similar like with so when we do the cake, we're going to make sure we paint this base before we flood the center. Okie dokie. So next up, we're going to grab our bouquet. And we're going to do the detail piping and the leaves. How exciting. Okay, so let's start with, I like to do the detail piping first. If your bouquet is not quite dry enough, you may want to do the detail piping second. But for the sake of optimal order, in my opinion, my bouquet is dry enough, so I'm going to start with the detail piping, and then we're going to do the leaves, and obviously I have to teach you how to cut the bag for the leaves. So for this one, I like to go from the outside, the outside in. Sweet Sugar Belle, who I learned this from, goes from the inside out. I just visually can't seem to get the outside edge as well. I like to be able to start on the outside and know like what I'm working with in terms of the border, and then come in as much as I can. So you're giving like, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch on the edge here and just kind of swirling in. You can see that I'm really not lifting my bag. I'm just like the way we did the outline of the flowers. I'm doing what I always tell you not to do, which is hover over the cookie. Okay. This is where though, like if your icing isn't quite dry enough and you have a very unsteady hand, then you might poke the icing. This is where you can kind of create whatever, like here's kind of a blob. I want this to have a little more shape. So you don't have to make your outline or your detail piping like precisely with the outline of the actual shape. Does that make sense? And you can kind of change up where you like start and end. If you want to start in the middle, that's kind of what it would look like. But I don't know. It just doesn't work as well for me. So do what works best for you. But that's my MO. Now we are going to get our bag all cut for the leaves. My goodness. So I just want to point something out. The way that you cut your bag is going to affect like how much icing comes out. So you can either do, just show you, you can do like a really sharp or kind of shallow cut. I recommend the sharp cut. The shallow cut is it's deceiving. You might think that will give you like a wider tip, but it's going to give you more icing coming out of the bag. So it's going to be a really thick leaf. If you want a thinner leaf, this is the kind of tip you want to cut. And the width of the leaf is going to depend both on how far up, like if you cut more up here, like how big the tip is that you cut, and also the pressure on your bag. So like this little baby leaf is the same as this bigger leaf, okay? So the way that you cut for tip is, or a leaf tip, the way you normally cut a bag is, you know, with the seam on the bottom and the fold on top. In this case, you actually want the seam on one side and the fold on the other side, and you're going to flatten the bag intentionally. Okay, this is okay because these are the natural seam and fold of the bag. You're not like ruining the integrity of the bag by doing this. So I usually like to flip my bag around like this so that I can tackle the bag from here. And you obviously have to work with like however you already cut the bag. So you can't make it any smaller than that, but there we go. That is how I cut my bag. Let me kind of give you a bigger, let's see, give you a nice background so you can really see how much I cut that bag, okay? So, what are we gonna do next? I just wanna show you, again, kind of the angle I was cutting was like this, okay? And I like to brace my pinky on the edge. Let me just kind of focus this. I'm not actually cutting right now. I just want to like demonstrate again. Oh, there's icing coming out of that, but that's the idea. Okay. So after you cut that, then you want to flip the bag over so the fold is on top and you want to actually smush the bag out. So then it becomes that nice V. So let's practice piping a little bit. So all right, to start, make contact, squeeze, pull. Contact, squeeze, pull. How much you squeeze is going to dictate the size of your leaf. So you can see I can get like really big ones out. Or if you barely squeeze, you'll get smaller ones. Now, for the kind of textured leaf, or whatever you want to call that, like this one, this is like a sawing motion. Make contact, in, out, right, left. Now, I can tell my icing is a little on the thin side, so it's not holding its shape quite as much as I would like to, but it's not the end of the world. Like if yours is like mine, it's okay. I would say the hardest part of these leaves is starting and is ending it, okay? So you make contact, you pull out. If you pull out too like weirdly, you can kind of have, I'm trying to manipulate this. Oh, it's not working. Of course, when I'm trying to demonstrate poor form, I can't do it. Sometimes you'll get like an incomplete edge, and you'll know it when you know what I'm talking about when you see it. You want to release pressure before you pull the bag out. So, contact, release pressure, pull away. Contact, release pressure, pull away. Contact, release pressure, pull away. Let's do some big ones. Contact, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Release pressure, pull away. And as best as you can, I would say try not to get super pointy ends like that one, just because that's gonna like flake off really easily when your cookie is dry, and that can just like fall off into the bag, whatever. So let's do our leaves. Always angle your cookie at the most convenient angle. And if you really hate your leaf, you can always kind of scrape it off and do it over. This little one over here, I think just ends up being like a tiny little leaf. So I'm just moving my cookie around. I like to really like shove it in there and get as much like leaf action as I can. And there we go. That is our first completely done cookie. Let's pat ourselves on the back. We're going to put that cookie to the side somewhere safe. I don't think it needs to go in the dehydrator. That's pretty like thick icing, the green. It can just kind of sit to the side. All right, then we're going to pull our heart and dress out of the dehydrator. I believe we did our dress first, so that probably means the dress is more dry. So for this one, we're going to do the little detail piping on top. And then we're going to do the leaves. So grab our fuchsia piping consistency. Kind of got a messy workstation going on here. Do the little wah, 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 same as we did with the bouquet. Now, you could leave it like this. I personally couldn't decide if it looked good with the leaves or without. Clearly, I decided with the leaves. Is it really realistic? No. Do I think it looks cute? Yes. So to each their own. But this is practice in doing the tiniest little leaves. That's it. She's so cute. That is our second cookie that's completely done. Pat selves on back. Okay. That's also going to go somewhere safe, hopefully. I need some new homes for all of my cookies. Actually, let's see, redistribute these. All right, next up, we have our heart, which I'm also going to finish. Make sure that your flour is dry enough. And then we're going to add our leaves. And in this case, I like it like a little bit bigger and kind of covering the diagonal line. That's my personal preference on placement, but you can do whatever makes you happy. Clearly I'm turning the cookie always. That was like 3 little jostles back and forth. There is our third cookie, completely done. I'm so proud of us. 3 out of 7. Let's go. Okay. So next up is arguably, possibly the hardest cookie in the set. You can get mad at me later or now, whichever one you prefer. So what's hard about this is obviously 2 things. Oh, I'll say 2 things. The obvious one, maybe there are 3 hard things. There's the lettering. There's painting the wedding band. And then there is timing it just right so that you can optimize not getting craters on this part of the lettering. So I really hemmed and hawed with this set about whether or not I should do this kind of fancy lettering, because obviously with this one, this is like super simple, just handwriting lettering for the banners. This is a very, very common kind of lettering, like cookie for bride wedding stuff. And I just felt like it wasn't a bridal shower set without this cute little love. And we dressed it up with a diamond as the O. Yeah. So We're doing this one alone because I want to get the timing just right for that flood. And I will explain that in a minute. First up, we are going to outline our cookie. And I like to start here as a right-handed person. If you're left-handed, you probably want to start on the other side. And just making contact in all those little corners. Okay, then I stop there and I go back over here so I can go back to left to right. Okay, so while that outline is having its precious time drying a little bit, let's talk about the important timing of the flood while I switch my beverages. So, we've talked a little bit about cratering, but not a ton. Cratering naturally happens to royal icing as it dries. It's like an indentation in the icing, something about the science of the weight of the sugar versus the liquid. I don't know, something. So, also science I don't understand. When you're doing 2 layers, you are less likely to get craters if you do that second layer on top of a base flood that has just barely crusted enough. If you do the second layer on top of a totally dry flood, it is 99% likely going to crater. But you see how lovely and poofy this is? I did just like one tiny little line in the middle, and this is still so freaking poofy. And that is because I did the lettering on top of the flood that was just barely dry enough. Now, how much time is that? It's anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, usually, depending on if you're using a dehydrator, it's probably 15 minutes. If you're not, if you're just using a fan, it's probably 30 minutes. It is at that stage where it is smooth but tacky. So remember, it goes from like totally, it goes wet, tacky, smooth but tacky, totally smooth, like silk smooth, like this table smooth. If you are super beginner here, which maybe, I don't know if there are anyone taking this class that is, totally fine if you are. I might wait a little bit longer because obviously it's like a little more delicate to be piping on top of something that's like just barely crusted enough. But this is where I really want to push you to like, this is next level stuff. So if I ever did this like in a beginner class, I would not care how dry the base is. I would actually let it dry more because it's more stable to work with. You also might be asking the question like, well, isn't there going to be color bleed, Grace? This is where it's really important that you started your fuchsia at the right time and you let your colors develop and you don't use too much food coloring, because yes, like this is more likely to get color bleed if you are piping this white on top of a flood that's not totally dry. So enough talking. Let's flood this baby. I love flooding hand lettered cookies. I don't know. I just like all these little parts that jut out. It's just so satisfying. Just a little dance. And when you have this many like little, I don't know, jut is not the right word, but I can't like think of the right word, like curves. You really want to make sure you're not over flooding so you can like maintain the integrity of all of these little corners. You can see here that I kind of over flooded this a little bit because it's like losing the integrity of that corner. If that happens and it really bothers you, you can always like take some icing up. It's not a big deal. I'm just mentioning it as like a next level. Okay. So we're going to put this in the dehydrator and we're going to set a timer for 15 minutes. While this chills in the dehydrator, I would also recommend that you might want to set a timer for 15 minutes because obviously like my 15 minutes might not be the same as yours if you're pausing the video. While that is dehydrating, we are going to practice So, y'all might not be happy with me that we're starting with this lettering instead of the easy one. You could leave this cookie till the end, but I prefer to do it now because remember the darkest flood, we're going to do it now. Now, obviously we're leaving the other fuchsia flood to the end, but whatever. We can't be perfect here. We can just try hard enough. So I'm going to practice with the fuchsia just because it's easier for you to see than the white, but you can use whatever color floats your boat. I want to say, so I very intentionally chose to do a hand lettered plaque like this for this kind of lettering, as opposed to just freehanding this on like a square or a circle or something, because the curves of the shape of the cookie itself is going to help guide you as you freehand this, because friends, we are freehanding all of our lettering today. I should have said that earlier. I mean, you knew that walking into this. I just want to preface this with freehanding is never going to look, no, that's a lie. That was dramatic. I was going to say it's never going to look as good as a projector. I mean, there are some people, I can think of some people right now whose freehand is as good as a projector. Like, they are incredible beasts. I'm amazed at them. My freehand is not as good as a projector. I think that's the case for most people. So you just have to give yourself some grace, not pun intended. It's going to look like it's going to look like it's going to look good enough. We're going to be happy that we didn't have to use a projector. So it is what it is. So there are two different ways to approach outlining this kind of lettering, and I'm going to show you the two ways. The first way is my preferred way, and then I'll show you the other way. With this particular one, I find it easier, since we're freehanding this, in terms of spacing, to actually start with the ring. This is definitely the hardest part, and it's definitely, oh my God, is this a circle? I mean, it's close enough. This is where you really got to give yourself grace. Okay. So I like to start with the circle because it just helps joining the L and the V a little easier. So we're going to be hugging the outer corner or the outer edge and join that L up. And then add the bar. Sometimes I add the bar as I'm doing it. Sometimes I add the bar as I go, or at the end. The V has one little jut out. This is not a continuous thing. You see how much I'm lifting my bag off the cookie. For the E, exaggerate the curve of the E. Because if you don't make it big enough, when you come back and do the bar, so here I'm doing the bar and the V, you'll kind of lose the inset of that E. I did that on one. I didn't totally lose it, but it made like this little cutout really small. So that is one way to outline. I want to show you the other way. Still want to start with the O. And what is different about this way is you're not doing as much like overlapping. So you see how my lines have overlapped here. This method is not going to overlap. I think it's harder to do this method well because you start here. See, you're doing like you're outlining the outline. So it makes, I think, like that intersection a lot more challenging because you have to lay this down just right. I honestly don't really know the point of doing it this way. I just know that I've seen other people do it this way. So the V is not going to be any different because with the singular line, you want this to cross over, but the E will be different. So you can see, I think it makes the joining right here really messy. It's hard to get that placement right. You can take your scribe, either method you do, if you want to be really particular, and actually use your scribe to like join, like neaten up all of the joints. You might have to do this as you go instead of waiting till the end, because if it starts to crust, it's not going to look good. So either way you do it, I like to then add a line through the bars. This is also just a way to like try to help prevent craters. I prefer to do one cookie at a time when doing this kind of lettering so that you can flood while the lettering is still wet. So you're going to take your flood and apply barely any pressure and kind of lay your flood on top. You want the width of your flood to be the width of the outline. Okay? Take your scribe. First, start by kind of like jiggling the main part of the bar. I don't know what this is called. I keep calling it a bar. I don't know what it's called. And then take your scribe to get the cleanest seam or joint, whatever this is. You want to kind of, just like with the corners of flooding, you want to kind of lay the icing on top of the edge. Does that make sense? Hopefully. So you'll know if you put too much icing, because it's gonna have kind of like lumps on the side. So I'm kind of laying the icing, remember, on top of that seam, making sure I drag the icing over the corners. So instead of like it being held in, it's kind of actually laying on top of the outline, which might make people nervous that it'll overflood, but this is such a small area. It's okay. It can get a little awkward doing these tiny little floods. But that is okay. All right. So we're going to keep practicing a little bit until that timer goes off. I like to do one bar at a time. So you can either keep practicing or you can just pause. If you're going to practice a lot more, I might like switch up the colors that you're using. All right, so at this point, I feel like I've practiced enough. I'm going to pause the video, or I'm going to pause myself. Hasn't been quite 15 minutes yet, just because I want 15 minutes to go by. I'll come back, set your timers too, and we'll come back to the cookie. Okay, it's now been 15 minutes, so I'm going to check on my cookie from the dehydrator. Ooh, I totally stuck my thumb in it. Whoops. That's why you don't pick up your cookie with one hand. But I had to learn for us. See, I stuck my thumb in the corner. Okay, so the question is the cookie dry enough? I would say it's just barely dry enough for me. It's more tacky than smooth. I usually like even tacky, even smooth. Like I can't really quite run my finger across it. But for me, this is good enough. You could roll with this if you want. You can see like there's some shine, but it's not like super shiny. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but this is the kind of thing where sometimes you kind of just got to do it and see what happens. If you are too nervous and you're like, oh my God, Grace, like, I don't want to do it too soon, you could set a timer for another 10 minutes. I'd probably, if it's already been 15 minutes in the dehydrator, I would leave it out in front of a fan. If you're just using a fan, it's probably gonna be 30 minutes anyway. I know the timing of this is a little annoying. If you have to sit around and wait for it, I think it's worth it though, because the timing of this one is the most challenging. So we are going to actually, oh my God, do the lettering. We need our white piping consistency, and we need our white flood. We need our scribe, and we need all the patience and grace for ourselves that we can give us. Okay. So you can practice doing the 2 different outlining ways on the cookie. If you've already figured out which one you like better, do that. Remember, we're going to start with the circle. You might want to have like your guide practice sheet next to you. Make it as circly as you can. Always start and end at the top of the circle where the V is going to go. Okay, now we say a prayer. And you just got to go for it. So when doing this lettering, you can see that you're not bringing it all the way to the edge. So I'm not going to bring this outline all the way to the edge. That's part of the visual satisfaction, or whatever you want to call it, design. So my outline is not all the way to the edge. I'm going to bring my bar in. Okay. Then we do our little jut. And then the down motion for the V. Bring it up. Circle it around. Exaggerate that E as much as you can. Make it as big as you can. Hey. Look at that. Look at that gorgeousness. Okay, I made that bar a little bit too big on the E. Oh well. Bring a line down the center. And then we are going to flood. So we're not going to do the diamond yet, because we're going to paint. We're going to paint the diamond first. Remembering to kind of bring the icing over the edge. Covering up the little seam with the icing. Et voila. I'm proud of myself. I want you to pause. I want you to look at what you've done and say, I am proud of myself. Do not nitpick it, okay? Because I can nitpick mine too, but I'm not going to, because I am proud of myself. Pat self on back. I'm going to put this in the dehydrator. Now, chances are you're working with more than one cookie than I am. So you can probably just do one at a time and then come back to paint the diamond. I'm only doing one at a time, so I'm going to set a timer on my end for 5 minutes. Just to let the icing crust enough on the white to come back and paint it. What was I going to say? Because you want to make sure that your icing is dry enough before you paint it. I used to think that icing had to be like completely dry to paint it. And sometimes I still do that when I'm really nervous about something, because I know that I can't screw it up if it's completely dried. If it's not completely dry, or like if it's not dry enough, you can actually like puncture a hole in the icing with the liquid, if that makes any sense. But it's like it happens as it dries. Do not worry though, because the applications we're doing today, we're doing piping consistency, which is going to dry pretty quickly. And then this guy here, it's crackled anyway. So if you end up painting it before it's dry enough, like no one's going to notice. So I have my timer set for 5 minutes. I just want to let the white dry enough and then we'll be back. Okay, it's now been 5 minutes. So I'm going to take my cookie out of the dehydrator. So this part is definitely not dry enough, the white, but that's okay because we're not concerned with that right now. We're going to grab a paper towel. I like to put all my gold stuff on a paper towel, by the way. I didn't like explicitly say that, but just many, many times of mistakes. So this has been sitting for a hot minute. It's going to need, at the very least, a good mix. It might need more liquid. We shall see. I think it looks pretty good. I'm just going to go for it. I lied. I tested it on some crusted icing first. Okay. Extra careful. Oh yeah, that's good. You might want to turn your cookie because I'm at an awfully dangerous angle right now where I totally could have gotten the gold on that V. And I've definitely been there. I've made like just about every mistake with gold that you can make. So if you used too much gold, you might want to let this dry for a little bit. Well, you probably want to let it dry for a minute anyway. So, but if you like go ahead and do all your gold rings and then come back to it, you'll be fine. I'm just going to roll with this right now. And we're doing the little diamond on here, which I do give it a tiny little cap. That is very hard to see. But what I'm doing is this, just in a very, very small section. I do think it's helpful, since we're working with a flood here, like a real flood, that you give it that tiny little cap on the top and then just go boop. You don't need to say boop. And there's the diamond. This should go back in the dehydrator for a hot minute. To give maybe like another 5 minutes for the letters to dry, but that is done. We've now done 4 of 7, my friends. I am going to set a timer because otherwise I will forget. Just to give it another 5 minutes in the dehydrator. Okay. 4 cookies down, 3 to go. We are going to do, we're going to start with the 2, what are these called? Banners. Kind of get myself situated here. Okay. So the difference here with our banners is that one is going to have all of the flags flooded individually, and this one has them not. So this is the same exact cookie cutter. Here are just 2 different ways you can customize this. If the bride's name is 5 letters, perfect way to do the flags in another way. You can write just about anything on what is this called? On this banner, you can write the date, you can write the bride's name, you can write whatever makes sense. Something you could do here, what's very common is like G plus A, Grace and Anthony. I don't know. I just made that up. The way you could do that with 5 here, whoopsies, you could put the G here, the plus here, the A here, and then you could do like a little heart on the last ones, which is the kind of heart that we're doing here. Just an idea. You can do whatever floats your boat. All right, we're going to start with the bride. And I'm going to put this at an angle just because it's easier to see, but also slightly easier to pipe. So this is where's my, you can't see, it's a hot mess. Okay. If you have an edible marker, this is where this could be helpful, not necessary at all. You could also use your scribe to kind of like give yourself a guide if you really want to. So for this one, I do think it's helpful just to kind of mark out where the different flags are. And then we're going to take our piping consistency. Whoops. All right, hold on. I need a minute. Just like covered in icing everywhere. All right. So we've simplified this. All right. So you could outline all of these flags individually and then flood them, which I've done before, but like you have to get the outlines really close to each other and that just takes more time and I just can't. So I like to do it this way, where we outline the entire section of the flags. And here you can't see, but I am actually lifting my bag off after every contact point. The top here is a little hard to do. It's not super defined. So just do your best. So we do the outline first. And then top to bottom. Just like so. Lifting the, whoopsies, did not make contact very well there. That's where the edible marker is like a guide. If you want to be really particular, which I'm not, we've discussed this, but you can actually use your scribe to like fix where you joined the lines, but y'all don't have the patience for that. Okay, next up, we are going to do the squiggle. This is going to help prevent craters and I think works very well on this shape. So I left this on here to show you. You see a little pokey bit down there? Not good. We don't want any pokey bits on our squiggle. So keep the squiggle touching the cookie. It is a zigzag motion back and forth, and you're just keeping it really tight, okay? A not tight would be like this, okay? But that's essentially what that motion is. I do not like to let my squiggle dry. I think it does better when it's wet. I like to do one flag at a time. At this point, it is very possible and very likely that your fuchsia is starting to separate, which is totally fine. Just give it a good little massage. My timer is going off, so I'm going to finish this flag first. This is why I set timers, because I forget. I already forgot that the love was sitting in the dehydrator. So I'm going to pull this out. She done. Just going to set her to the side. Okay. So we're going to finish. You want to make sure that the squiggle is not all the way to the edge. Give it a little bit of a border. And then when you flood, you are actually kind of flooding on top, like so. Okay. And you want to, give this a good amount of icing. You remember, if you don't use enough icing, the squiggle can actually like poke through. No good. What's going to make this look really clean is what I'm doing right now, which is where I'm actually like encouraging the icing to kind of cover all of the corners. That's what's going to give it the most seamless look. If you don't do that, not the end of the world. All right, we're going to pop this in the dehydrator because we need to let these crust before we do the remaining ones. Okay. Now, this one is simple, right? We need our peach outline and flood. So let's outline this baby first. If you need to use your edible marker for a guide just on this very edge, you could, if you need to. Ooh. Okay. We're going to let that crust for just a hot minute. You might have seen, I think in the step-by-step photos, if you like to look at those, what was I going to say? In the step-by-step photos, I think I did these flowers in kind of an odd order. I didn't really think through the video, but we're going to do them in a logical order today. So just in case those are separate. At this point, hopefully, you've probably done a couple of these, so this is probably crusted enough. You can wait another minute if you want. I'm not going to. I'm just going to go for it. Even though this is kind of like a long shape, I'm not worried about it like over flooding like I would in like a bigger cookie shape if the outline is not dry enough. Okay. Use a scribe. Get the icing into all the corners, and you'll see if your outline isn't quite dry, you'll see how differently it feels to kind of correct those corners when your outline isn't totally dry. There we go. She gorgeous. She's going in the dehydrator. Whoops. This one's kind of hard to pick up because it's so long. Be careful, like, not to break your cookie, though, because that would be sad. All right. Next up, we are tackling the cake. So, should be your last naked cookie. This one, again, you could take your edible marker and mark off the sections if you need to. I personally don't want to because I just don't want to. But I don't know, since we're here, this is what you would do if you need that extra visual. You're just totally fine. I'm just lazy. Okay, so we are going to outline the cake, all the different sections of the cake. Everything that is flooded is white. We are just outlining the base here. We're not doing anything like fancy. So outline, outline. Now, I do just want to point out that This is actually like a normal 3-tier cake, but I decided to make the 3rd tier flowers to go with the theme, but you could totally make this 3rd tier just a normal cake to customize it. You could do a lot of different things, but that's another thing with this design. I wanted all of these shapes to be like customizable. So I made this flowers for this particular one, but you could ice that, and you could put like little flowers elsewhere on the cake, whatever makes your heart happy. So we're going to go in now, and we are going to flood okay, I was just looking at my notes to make sure I do this right. We're going to flood the base and the top one because we're flooding these in sections. Okay. This is going to get crackled, so if you get any craters, it don't matter. Actually, you won't be able to see craters because it's going to get crackled before it dries. Okay, so we're doing the bottom. And then we're doing the top. Just get the icing into those corners. If you're like, Grace, I don't care about the corners, that's totally fine too. I don't always care about my corners. And then we're actually going to do the fuchsia flower on top because that doesn't touch any of the cake. And there's so much flooding in sections on this cake. The layers, the flowers, that we want to do as many steps as we can each time we go to the cookie. So just did this little flower like we've done all of our other independent fuchsia flowers. Now this goes in the dehydrator. Be super careful picking this one up. Woo! At this point, you'll want to set a timer for 10 minutes so that we can come back to the cake stand and see if it's ready to crackle in 10 minutes. As I'm pausing and think, okay, sorry. Okay, we're going to take our banners out. Try not to ruin any cookies in the process. Okay. So at this stage, we're going to take the bride one first. And guess what? We're going to fill in the other banners, whatever these things are called. Oh my goodness, I'm getting icing everywhere. So you want to just make sure again that like the first flags have just crusted enough. And you want to flood, trying to show you this, flood up next to the first section. That was a really awkward angle because I was trying to show it to you. Do your best to get enough icing next to the banner in your first go, next to the original flag in your first go, because I find that when you have to manipulate it too much with your scribe, it kind of messes with the beautiful seam. So I'm doing like a flood pressure here. And when you do use your scribe, keep your scribe at least like a few millimeters away from the edge, unless you're like trying to do the corners here. Because the closer you get to the seam with your scribe, the more you mess with it, and it will, like if you had a nice straight seam before, it won't be straight anymore. Okay, then we're going to do the big flowers on each of these. Whoops. So for this one, we need peach. Okay. So there is going to be a little bit of outline, or I mean overlap, but you're just doing this on the edge. Whoops. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. My brain left the building. So this is not a super big deal, and I probably would have just like left this alone. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. If you accidentally did this, take it off, don't take it off. It is going to get covered with the pink flower and the green. Okay, let's try this again. So overlap a little bit onto the corner. You might notice that this banner, so the edge of this banner is actually not meant for flowers. It's supposed to be a ribbon, but this is where you get to really nicely kind of customize your cutters for whatever you need. And if you wanted to do a ribbon on here instead, you could, but that's a whole other game. And maybe, anyway, neither here nor there. Okay. So these are our little peach blobs. That's going to go in the dehydrator. And of course, I forgot to set a timer for the crackle. So I just set a timer for 8 minutes. I usually set a timer for about 10 minutes on the first go for crackle. It usually takes at least 10 minutes if you're using a dehydrator. It'll take a little bit longer if you're not using a dehydrator. If you didn't set a timer already, I mean, obviously, because I didn't say anything, do not panic, okay? 8 minutes based off of whatever I just said is fine. Okay, let's grab our pink. This is not pink, this is peach. And we're going to do the big flower, which is the fuchsia. Again, kind of just like overlap the corner there. Blood that in. Okay, this is going to go back in the dehydrator. Let's see where we're at. Okay. Got another few minutes on the timer for the crackle. So I'm going to let that run out. And then I'll be back to get the crackle for the base of the cake. Okay, it's now been 10 minutes on my end. So I'm going to check the cake situation. And while I'm there, nope, I'm going to leave them in there. Okay. I am going to leave the two banners in there a little bit longer for me. You may want to pull yours out depending on how long your banners have been in the dehydrator. Okay. So at this point, we want to crack the base. Okay. I like to use the smaller one for this. You know it has dried enough if when you poke it, it cracks. So, ooh, this is a really small. This is like just barely dried enough. If you're getting really like indents instead of cracks, you might want to wait a little bit longer. When you're doing this crack, two things. One, don't go all the way to the edge. If you get too close to the edge, you're going to see very quickly why that becomes a problem, because you're going to kind of like ruin the edge of the icing, which is not a problem. If it does happen, just kind of like use your finger and encourage it back into the right spot like I did just there. There we go. And if you pick up the end of your tool and it has icing on it, that means that you have punctured the surface, not cracked it. You don't want to go that far. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is the peach flower. So this is going to overlap both the cake and the fuchsia flower a little bit, just for, I don't know, aesthetics. And we're going to pop this back in the dehydrator because the crackle needs to dry more before we can paint it. And remember, we want to paint the base before we flood next to it because it'll be easier on our hearts. Okay. So when I say our hearts, I mean our literal hearts, not like our cookie hearts. All right, we're going to put that in there. We're going to grab our banners. Okay. And for both of these, we're going to do the other flower, which is the pink flower. So let me, let's see, just to show you. Okay, so let's grab our pink, get a new paper towel. And I'm going to cover up my mistake. Yay. So the pink is just going to kind of get sandwiched next to the peach. Again, if it looks a little, whoops, wonky, it's going to get kind of covered up by the detail piping anyway. That's going to go back in the dehydrator just for a little bit longer. Then we're also, oh no, oh, this is why you don't pick this up with two fingers. I mean, with one hand. Always two fingers, but not one hand. Okay, let's do our peach. I mean, our pink. I am just losing my peas at this point. Okay. Just kind of cover up that corner. My pink is really separating. So what I do is I pinch the end so that icing doesn't come out, and I can like better massage it like that. Okay. Oh no. Oh my God, I totally got. Ah! Okay, there we go. All right, this is gonna go back in the dehydrator. At this point, I would probably take the cake out. Just because we don't want it in there too long. Let's see. Oh no, 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 no. Just kidding. We are leaving that in there. At least for me, that base is still like wet. Okay, we are going to now practice our lettering before we get to lettering. I'm going to use the fuchsia again just because it's easy to see. So for this one, this is like, you know, roughly the size of the lettering you're going to be doing. It may not be precise. So contact, lift, contact, contact, lift. You always want to make sure that you are lifting your bag when doing this kind of lettering. When you're doing lettering too, it's really important that you're holding your bag correctly. You've got your seam on the back and the fold on the top, so you can get the nicest tip possible. You can see I kind of went rogue. I prefer to do my R that way, but I couldn't find text font that looked right. So I am lifting my bag up like 1/4 of an inch. Just very simple lettering. And here you can practice your numbers. Whoops, I was looking at the camera and not at the paper, which is why that looks so wonky. So whatever numbers you need to do for your particular bride. I don't like to do 4s this way necessarily. I tend to do 4s like this, but you can do whatever floats your boat. You always want to be lifting that bag, even if it's like a millimeter. I don't know why I just did that. What? That's what's going to get you the cleanest lines. That was a terrible 6. You can simplify this 7 too. Like you don't have to do the little extra. I usually like to do 8s, like a figure 8, but you can also do 8s like 2 circles. That works too. The 9, I also usually like to do just simplified like this. But this is also a way to do 9s. 0 might be the hardest one because it's obviously like basically just a circle. Always brace your arm on the edge of the table. Remember to give yourself some extra stability if you need it. This is your time to just practice as much as you want, but also remembering, right, that like we just have to breathe and go. You can practice as much as your heart desires, and then at some point you just have to pull the trigger and you just have to do it. I love you. That's the reality. I know hand lettering, it takes a lot of self-confidence. All right, at this point, I'm going to take everything out of the dehydrator. Just because I don't want everything chilling in there too long. Okay. So we are going to start with, I think we'll start with let's do the bride first. I think this one's a little easier to do because you have the spacing already done for you. So we're going to start with the little, whatever this is at the top, like these little things. You know, like a quarter of an inch, no, an eighth of an inch down, roughly. And then this is the case, again, we're going to be painting this lettering. You don't have to paint this lettering. If you don't want to paint it, if you're not using gold, whatever, you could make the lettering. I would probably make this peach in this case. You also don't have to paint the base. This is more in the workbook. I talk about that if you want to not use gold. The base can be a different color. I would probably say fuchsia, but whatever color you want, except green, obviously, because you have to have a flood. So breathe in and out and just go for it. So what's nice about this one is that, I guess the blessing and the curse is that the spacing is done for you. Do your best to make all the letters the same height. See, this one, for whatever reason, you can tell that my letters are taller than the sample that I made. I don't know. It just happened. So, are we going to put this back in the dehydrator? Yes, this goes back in the dehydrator. And then we're going to do the date one. Oh my goodness, I keep whacking this. Okay. So let's grab our white. This one is definitely harder because you have to get the spacing. So if you're doing a 2-number month, like if your date is different length, keep that in mind. So what I do is I count the number of letters I have. Well, numbers in this case. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, the dot 7. So when there's an odd number, it's nice because then you just take the letter in the middle, and that's what I start with. So in this case, it's 3 on either side. So the 3 is the number I start with. This is how I like to do spacing. I don't like to go from just left to right. So I start with a 3. Then I go to the right. And do your best to leave room for that heart. But if you're like me and you just kind of made this a little too big, that's okay. You can omit the heart. Let me show you the heart situation. This is just a pressure piped heart. Cute little detail. You pipe a dot, you pull away towards the cookie and release. Pipe a dot, pull away towards the cookie and release. So you are coming down towards the cookie, okay? So pipe a dot, pull away and release. And I am actually touching the surface as I release, okay? So add the heart, don't add the heart. This is a little tight over here, but then I had like too much space over here. Sometimes adding something like this will like emphasize that your spacing is off. Sometimes it helps. Use your judgment. I probably could have done without the hearts on this one. It's kind of emphasizing the fact that I got a little too squishy on one side. But y'all, it's fine. Okay. So those are both banners in the dehydrator. We're going to grab the cake, which is already out. So I want to make sure that it's like pretty dry. Like if I apply a tiny bit of pressure, it's not going to crumble. I would say this is a hair not dry enough, but I'm going to roll with it because I'm me. You might want to wait a little bit longer. You have two options. If your base is not quite dry enough, it should be able to withstand a little bit of pressure. Like I'm dry enough over here on the edge, but I can tell in the center here, I'm not quite dry enough. You have two options. You can either wait a little bit longer for this to dry, which I would recommend, or you can go ahead and flood the center, which then I guess still means you have to wait for it to dry. I was going to say you could flood the center and then move things along, which does kind of move things along. But it messes with the order and all that. So I'd probably just wait for your base to dry a little bit more if you can. So let's get our gold out. But this time we're using our bigger brush, okay? And I'm fairly certain I'm going to need more liquid right now. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I can see it's kind of like pasty. So I'm going to grab my color solution. What is nice about painting the base first is you can be messy and it doesn't matter. So I'm being really gentle here because mine is just barely dry enough. But obviously this is already crackled. So like if I accidentally puncture the icing, it don't matter. For those at home, I would probably not recommend painting this at this juncture. Yeah, I can really tell, oops, towards that center. But chances are you've taken a little bit longer on everything. So be generous, but not too generous. Remember, if there's too much gold on it, then it makes it hard to dry well. Okay. We're going to give that just like a second to dry while we go and do the pink flower on here. So this kind of also overlaps. Oh my God. The corner of that looks terrible, but that's okay because it's going to get covered with the leaf anyway. Okay, so do all your pink flowers first and then come back just to give that gold like a second to dry. Come back and flood the bottom section. Gorgeous. Gorgeous. Whoops, 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 whoops. Okay. I can tell my icing is starting to separate, so just keep that in mind. You might need to pause and massage your icing. Okay. We are going to put that back in the dehydrator very carefully. With these longer shapes, be careful picking them up at one end like this. You know, try to pick them up in the middle if you can. Okay, we're going to take the, what are these called? Banners out of the dehydrator. And I want to start by doing the detail on the flowers. before painting, just to give the lettering even a little more time to dry. So let's grab our detail piping. We need the peach, and we need the pink. So just go ahead, do the peak and the pinch, peach and the pink. And then the leaves. Ooh, my end of my bag is like super crunchy. I need to clean that off. Okay. We're doing 2 big ones. So I like to do this in 2 stages, or like 2 goes. The small one goes up here somewhere, and you can use it to like cover up any mistakes. And then I move the cookie around, because you always want to be piping these leaves at the same angle. When you see me, when you see the video for this, you see I don't move the cookie, but that's just because I don't want to move the cookie for the sake of the movie, the film. So anyway, all right. We've got the fuchsia and the pink this time. And then we're going to do the leaves, which I'm kind of instantly regretting doing that leaf right now, because the painting, it's going to make the painting a little more annoying because my heart is too close. Okay, so keep that in mind. You might want to do your painting before, if your hearts are like way too close for comfort. I also don't know why I had that was a mistake. That was a mistake, making that leaf so close. Whatever, ship has sailed. Okay. So we're gonna grab our gold. And at this point, you probably want to take the cake out of the dehydrator. Actually, no, I don't want to. You might want to check yours though. Mine is definitely not dry enough. So we're going to paint the details, which on this is the heart and the lettering on the bride. So as always, make sure you don't have too much color. Oops, that's too much. Just enough to paint this cute little heart. I got a little overbleed in the corner, but I'm going to leave that because it is so not worth it to fix that. Now, since the hearts are like really upright, you could even like go around the sides upright. I mean, they stick out a lot, but like, I don't think that's worth it. Okay. I just don't think it's worth it. All right. We are now going to paint the lettering on the bride. This gets like a little trickier. You know, move the cookie as you need to get like the best angle. You may notice if it starts to like dry and clump up, add more liquid as you go. I tend to get impatient towards the end with gold, and then I try to like have too much on the end of my paintbrush, and I always regret it. So don't be like me. You have to have a lot of patience to paint with gold. Okay. I do not recommend doing a second layer unless you are like, actually, no, I really just would not recommend a second layer because, excuse me, it's going to, it is going to most likely come off on, if you're using any bags, which is like extra annoying since it's the most raised part of the cookie, that's more likely to get all over a cellophane bag. So we're now done with those. Oh my God, we're almost done. We're done with the gold. You can put that away. I'm gonna grab my cake. Oh no. Oh no. I got some overflood. Okay, this is a good opportunity to show you what to do. So in this case, it's still kind of wet. So I'm just going to lop it off. Now, what you could do is scrape this entire cookie, or at the very least, just scrape this part and redo it if you need this cookie to look perfect, because this is an order. This is not an order, so I'm just going to leave it. But this is where having this tool to scrape is very handy. So first thing, we're just going to add, this has a slight curve to it, this line. I kept finishing off the cake part super simple. You could fancy it up if you want to. Okay, and then we're going to add all of our detail piping on top of the flowers. At this point, we are a pro at this part, are we not? Each. And then, so I chose to add 2 little leaves to this. So one down here. Oh, see, that's what it looks like when you have like a broken leaf. Because I like pulled away too aggressively. Oh! All right. You could have left that, or I just tried to take it off. And now I have to make like a bigger leaf to kind of cover it. But look, no one needs to know. Okay, that was an evil laugh. And then a big leaf on top, like so. And then we are done. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay, let's get all the babies in one place if we can. Let's see. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. All right, that's, whoa, that's like not in the frame. Okay. Some things to do. Okay, the cookies are done. So now what? In the instructions, I do tell you, how to store your cookies, or, well, how to store your leftover icing. Do not put these cookies in a sealed container until the icing is hard to the touch. That takes like 6 to 8 hours typically. With the gold, so if you use too much gold, the gold will come off on your bags. One way to try to combat that is to brush the gold with cornstarch. I would probably only recommend, yeah, so you can definitely do it on the base here. It's not going to affect how it looks. I do find that when you brush things with cornstarch, that if there's any shine on the cookie, like the shine, it kind of mattifies the cookie, which is not like the end of the world, but just keep that in mind. I also don't feel like cornstarch always works, which I know is not like a helpful thing to hear. I would just say the general rule of thumb is to like try not to use too much gold. Something like this design where kind of the gold is the highest part is the most likely to rub off on a bag. Something like this where the gold is kind of inset, like the flower is much higher, probably not going to rub off. This might, But yeah, just things to keep in mind. You have the cornstarch if you use my recipe from my cookie recipe. So that's easy. I like to use like obviously a clean brush, like a really fluffy brush that's not going to like puncture the icing. Also, obviously make sure that your icing is completely dry before you do that. Yeah, I think those are all my notes. This was a long class. Thank you for sticking with me. We learned so much today. We went over a lot of different techniques today. We decorated like I did. So like give yourself a pat on the back. This is a set that I would make myself. I'm really proud of it. I think it's beautiful. I think you did a great job. Look at what you did. Look at it and say, I am proud of myself. I am proud of myself. Do not look at it and go, oh, I could have done that better, that better. No, no, no. We are here to be proud of ourselves. We are also here to learn and get better, but like we're here to be proud of ourselves. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me. I think it's time to end the class. Thank you so much for joining me today. I love to see your creations. Please, post them on Instagram, whatever, tag me. I don't always see all of them, so I'm so sorry. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for making this set. And best of luck for making these for your brides. Thank you and have a good one. Bye.